disaster happens, it becomes news around the globe. Whether it's the scale or the spectacle.
Look at the debris. Look at all the debris. Look at all the debris in the air.
The financial cost or the lives lost. These massive events fill mankind with fascination and fear. In this series, we're looking at some of the biggest disasters to ever strike the planet.
Mounds of twisted steel and cables mark a spot over a river in Vietnam where a bridge under construction has collapsed.
For the next hour, we'll see some of mankind's greatest engineering achievements fall prey to accidents, negligence, and design flaws. In better times, they carry us safely over rivers and valleys or under cities and mountains. But when things go wrong, they can become deadly to anyone using them. Take great care and watch the path ahead, because today, we're looking at the top 10 bridge and tunnel disasters. Over the millennia, humans have demonstrated a spectacular genius for building. We've erected pyramids, cathedrals, towers, and have met increasingly technical challenges to build monuments that defined each era. And among the most spectacular constructions, two moved us further along than any other: bridges and tunnels. Building a bridge over the void, or digging a tunnel under millions of tons of rock, requires a high level of technological prowess to achieve a result that's both efficient and safe. But unfortunately, even with the greatest advances, risk can't be completely factored out. And history has proven that, under just the right or wrong conditions, these masterpieces of engineering can become state-of-the-art death traps. To select the 10 worst ever bridge and tunnel disasters, we've studied the human and financial toll of accidents that took place around the world since the 19th century. We start our countdown with the event that occupies the 10th place in our ranking. Suspension bridges are among the most spectacular structures in the world. Some, like San Francisco's Golden Gate, have even become symbols of an entire city. But another one of these constructions marked history in a more dramatic way. Let's head to the city of Tacoma, Washington in the U.S., where a suspension bridge collapsed just months after its debut.
Opening of the new $6.5 million Tacoma Narrows Bridge over Puget Sound.
July 1st, 1940, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge opens with great fanfare. 1,810 meters long, the bridge connects the city of Tacoma to the city of Gig Harbor, located on the Olympic Peninsula. It crosses an arm of the sea known as Puget Sound. Construction took 1 year. The principle of suspension bridges is to support the load of the bridge deck by cables, which are secured at both ends. For the design of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, the engineers relied on a technique called elastic distribution. In principle, in the event of strong winds, the suspension rods are supposed to distribute the load evenly over an entire structure. But instead of stiffening the deck with beams 7.6 meters thick, the Tacoma Narrows engineers chose beams 2.5 meters thick. It cut costs and gave the bridge a finer, more majestic profile. But on November 7th, 1940, barely 4 months after its commissioning, and during gusts of 65 kilometers per hour wind, the bridge begins to oscillate. The deck starts to twist, little by little at first, and then gradually gaining amplitude. Despite its 15,000 tons of steel and concrete, the Tacoma Bridge gets tossed around by the wind like a child's toy. Bridge workers had suspected the inherent flaws of the bridge during its construction. They even nicknamed it Galloping Gertie, because at the slightest gust of wind, they felt like they were on a galloping horse. A University of Washington engineering professor, Frederick Farquharson, had been tasked with finding a solution to the bridge's annoying tendency to wobble. But he didn't get a chance to complete his assignment before that fateful day in November 1940, when the bridge and his work abruptly ended. He can be seen in the distance. In an act of bravery, he's trying to rescue a dog stuck in the car. But the terrified animal won't let him approach, and Farquharson, fearing for his own safety, has no choice but to abandon the bridge and the dog. As it happens, on that day, 2 amateur cameramen from the region, Barney Elliott and Harbeen Monroe, are on the scene with their 16mm cameras. They managed to capture these images, some of the most spectacular in the history of civil engineering. The bridge snaps, and a large part of it crashes into the water, 60 meters below. Luckily, the bridge had been evacuated before it collapsed. Only Tubby, the dog stuck in the car, perishes in the accident.
500 feet above Puget Sound, Washington, they're building a new bridge over the Tacoma Narrows.
10 years later,
Workmen are
in
busy stretching a perilous
1950,
catwalk
a new bridge
from
was
which they'll
built
fix
to replace the
cables that will one day
notoriously
support the
failed and
world's third
famous
longest
Tacoma
suspension bridge.
Narrows. But this time, engineers used much more robust materials and factored in the effects of the pummeling winds. In 2007, the structure is joined by a second suspension bridge to cope with the increase in traffic. Tacoma hasn't suffered any more bridge catastrophes like the one on November 7, 1940. But in some sense, even that bridge still survives in these unforgettable images of the 15,000-ton bridge twisting in the wind like a rubber band. Whatever its design, a bridge requires regular monitoring to detect any deterioration as early as possible. The stakes are high, so diligent maintenance is imperative. Putting it off means putting lives at risk. And yet, so many structurally deficient bridges remain unrepaired. That's the case with the bridge that takes the 9th place in our ranking. It happened in the heart of Minneapolis, the state capital of Minnesota in the United States, in 2007. The huge Mississippi River runs 3,780 kilometers and crosses the center of the country from north to south. Among the 130 bridges that span it, one has a particularly tragic history. The Interstate 35 motorway bridge. Opened in 1967, it linked the vibrant cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, serving 141,000 vehicles a day. As a continuous truss bridge, every part of its structure depended on every other part to keep its integrity. Continuous truss bridges are common, strong, and uniquely vulnerable if not maintained. This 8-lane bridge, known as Bridge 9340, was rated structurally deficient in 1990. In 2001, some of the girders were cracking. In 2005, engineers recommended replacing it. But on August 1st, 2007, at 6:05 p.m., a portion of the 160-meter bridge suddenly collapses during rush hour. The images captured by a surveillance camera shock the world. 111 vehicles fall 35 meters. Some find themselves stuck in the rubble of concrete and steel. Others sink directly into the waters in the Mississippi. Rescue teams, on site in just 6 minutes, managed to free all the survivors from their cars and take the seriously injured to the hospital just before nightfall. A real triumph. But between the currents and the rubble of the destroyed bridge, finding the victims who fell into the river is the greatest challenge.
3 days later, the weight and the pain are agonizing. Dozens of relatives of those killed in the Wednesday bridge collapse and those still missing received a private tour of the site, getting a look at the mangled remains and grieving together.
The divers spend 3 weeks trying to recover the vehicles swept away after the collapse of the bridge and finding the bodies of all the victims. The final count is 13 dead and 145 injured. The tragedy could have been much worse. It also could have been prevented if the damning reports from the inspections were acted upon a few years earlier. Engineers had originally anticipated needing to replace the bridge in 2020, only it didn't even last that long. An inspection after the collapse revealed why. Analysis of the wreckage exposed a design flaw. Plates used to connect girders to the truss were too thin. One buckled, failed, and triggered a domino effect on the others. The damage tore along a rivet line, leading to a total collapse.
Workers setting concrete, welding, hoisting sections into place. And amid painstaking labor, the new I-35 bridge takes shape. There is a reason the construction is attracting a crowd.
The city will inaugurate the St. Anthony Falls Bridge, built in record time at the same location as the old structure. A completely different design, this new concrete bridge was equipped with 323 sensors to detect the slightest vibrations in real time. Since then, Minneapolis residents have continued to confidently cross the Mississippi every day with a thought for those who lost their lives in the Interstate 35 bridge disaster. Among all the types of bridges, the so-called cable-stayed bridges are among the world's most widespread. In these bridges, huge oblique cables called stays are connected to pylons distributed over the entire length of the structure and are anchored to the deck to support the load evenly. The disaster that takes the 8th place in the ranking concerns an early version of one of these bridges. It happened in Italy in 2008 in the city of Genoa. In this port city of more than 500,000 people, a huge bridge was built in the early 1960s and inaugurated on September 4th, 1967. The Polcevera Viaduct, better known as the Morandi Bridge, named after its design of Ricardo Morandi.
If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, and that's spit slow, spitting fast like a roast. I can gas, think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past and the pettiness. A reflection of the emptiness, hilarious. You think you're with my time, you're delirious, mysterious, because you hide behind a fake exterior, inferior. You know I'll always be a bit superior. Get off of me, this ain't no humble brag. I want you to hear words, you can say them back. I want you to feel free from the chains at last, and to believe in what you got, it was built to last, yeah. Now that I've been put through hell, I never got.
On the morning of August 14th, 2018, a 210-meter section of the busy Morandi Bridge collapses with no warning. About 40 vehicles plummet into the river and valley by the fall of the deck, killing most of their occupants instantly. Fortunately, traffic is light because it's a public holiday. Rescuers extract 16 survivors from the rubble, but the disaster claims 43 lives. 4 days later, Italy honors the victims with a national funeral in Genoa. But half of the victims' families refused to participate. They laid the blame for this senseless tragedy completely on the Italian government. They cite decades of problems with the bridge and a history of negligence almost since its opening in 1967. Throughout the 1970s, the bridge underwent continual maintenance to repair cracks in the overstressed concrete. Moisture penetration through the cracks hastened corrosion of the metal surfaces. In the 1990s, inspections revealed that corrosion had also severely damaged the piers and stay cables. The bridge could support only half its intended load. The government tried reinforcement, but it was not enough. And in 2016, the Italian transport minister was alerted several times that the bridge needed urgent repairs. In 2017, an inspection revealed that the stay cables of Pier Number 9 had reached a critical level of corrosion, to the point of failure. Companies were invited to bid on the repair work, but it was too late. On August 14, 2018, the failure of Pier Number 9 triggered a catastrophic torsion of the deck that triggered the collapse of part of the Morandi Bridge. For almost a year, the broken skeleton of the bridge stood as a witness and grim memorial to the tragedy that claimed 43 lives. By June 2019, a new bridge was planned, and the remains of the ill-fated Morandi Bridge were demolished with explosives. In 7 seconds, approximately 4,500 tons of concrete and steel from the two huge cable-stayed piles number 10 and 11 collapsed in a cloud of dust. A year later, a new bridge of 1,067 meters was born. Designed by Renzo Piano, the famous architect from Genoa, the work is a symbol of the country's new attitude of increased responsibility to its citizens and its infrastructure. For the victims' families and to all the Italian people, it stands as a promise that an avoidable tragedy like the 2017 disaster of the Morandi Bridge will never happen again. Make it possible to span rivers and valleys. Tunnels enable us to pass through mountains. It takes incredible feats of engineering to grind a channel through solid ancient rock. And no tunnel is truly complete until it meets a major challenge, assuring the safety of vehicles that use it. Despite best intentions, things can go wrong, bringing us to number 7 on our countdown. We'll now head to the Alpine Mountains, on the border between France and Italy, where a terrible fire broke out in 1999 in the Mont Blanc tunnel. Towering 4,808 meters, the roof of Western Europe, Mont Blanc reaches its highest point in France, only a few kilometers from Italy. Traveling between the two countries through the Alps used to mean taking small mountain roads and narrow passes. Many of these winding corridors are closed in winter. A solution was devised after the war: to dig an 11.6-kilometer-long tunnel to directly link Chamonix in France to Courmayeur in Italy. A monumental work whose route passes exactly in line with the Aiguille du Midi, Mont Blanc's legendary summit. The first attempts were dug on the Italian side in 1946, but the work officially started in 1959. It took 6 years to build the structure which would be called the Mont Blanc Tunnel. When it was inaugurated in 1965, it was the longest road tunnel in the world and reduced the journey between France and Italy by nearly 100 kilometers. With more than 100,000 vehicles passing through per month, tunnel traffic is dense. Every day, the tunnel is used by tourists, cross-border workers, and especially heavy trucks transporting goods between the two countries. Inside, everything had been planned so that drivers could cross the 12-kilometer tunnel in complete safety. But unfortunately, there's always room for risk. On March 24th, 1999, shortly after 10:45 a.m., a truck driver enters the tunnel on the French side. 4 minutes later, smoke begins to billow from his cabin. At 10:53, after having traveled 6 kilometers, he stops. His truck is on fire. Unable to get close enough with his fire extinguisher, the driver decides to flee. Some motorists manage to pass the truck, others turn around. But the semi-trailers are stuck. The burning truck contains a load of highly flammable margarine, as explosive as a tanker truck. The small fire turns into an inferno. The temperature soars and thick toxic smoke begins to spread. For the 40 blocked vehicles and most of their drivers, there is no way out.
Côté italien du tunnel, les secours travaillent au ralenti à cause de la chaleur et de la fumée
The
impossible à
Italian
évacuer.
firefighters racing to the scene are forced to abandon their vans just 300 meters from the fire.
Un véhicule équipé d'une caméra thermique tente en ce moment de progresser dans le tunnel.
In less than 5 minutes, all the vehicles located near the burning truck begin to ignite. The smoke, laden with carbon monoxide and cyanide, thickens. Electrical cables melt in the flames. The tunnel is plunged into darkness.
La noirceur des visages éprouvés des pompiers en dit long sur l'intensité de la fumée qui s'est propagée dans le tunnel du Mont Blanc.
At the heart of the blaze, the temperature exceeds 1,000 degrees Celsius and the cloud of toxic smoke spread to the entrance on the French
Les
side.
pompiers n'ont pas pu approcher le camion en flammes à l'origine de la catastrophe. Il est impossible d'accéder à une zone de 600 mètres envahie par une fumée épaisse.
The fire continues to intensify, and firefighters and emergency services cannot intervene without putting the lives of the rescuers in
Les
danger.
secours redoutent d'y trouver de nouvelles victimes.
The fire will burn for 3 days.
Ce soir, le feu couvre toujours. La température atteint plusieurs centaines de degrés. Il est impossible d'approcher à moins de 300 mètres du foyer de l'incendie.
And it will take 5 days for the temperatures inside the tunnel to drop to bearable levels so that the clearing work can begin.
Il se pourrait qu'on ait 1, 2, voire 3 véhicules. Mais c'est vraiment une incertitude.
When the rescuers finally manage to reach the center of the tunnel, they discover an apocalyptic scene. Burnt out vehicles, charred bodies. 29 people died in their vehicles. 9 others tried to flee on foot, but died of asphyxiation.
Les questions restent nombreuses sur les circonstances de la catastrophe. 2 enquêtes ont été ouvertes ce soir. Une technique administrative sous l'autorité du ministère des Transports, une autre judiciaire par le procureur de la République de Bonneville pour homicide involontaire.
Following this tragedy, new safety measures are put in place in tunnels around the world to alleviate smoke in the event of a fire.
Une centaine de familles a fait le déplacement jusqu'à Bonneville.
During the trial in 2005, 12 people, including the mayor of Chamonix and the head of tunnel security, were found guilty of manslaughter and negligence. They were sentenced to prison terms of 4 to 30 months. The truck driver who escaped unscathed by abandoning his vehicle received a 4-month suspended sentence. It's a sad irony that it takes 39 deaths and a tragedy like the one in the Mont Blanc tunnel to create better safety protocols. But the situation here is not unique. Crossing the Alps has always been a real challenge. Many other road and rail tunnels were drilled through the mountains to more quickly connect France, Italy, Switzerland, and Germany. And the Mont Blanc tunnel is not the only one to have experienced a terrible disaster. To investigate the event that takes 6th place in the ranking, let's head to Switzerland, where another large-scale fire hit the Gotthard tunnel in 2001. The Gotthard Massif in Switzerland culminates at more than 3,600 meters. Throughout history, its position has made it a highly strategic location. Located on the north-south axis, it has to be crossed to connect the industrial regions of northern Europe and the ports of Rotterdam and Antwerp to northern Italy and the cities of Milan and Turin, as well as the port of Venice. In 1969, a road tunnel was built to facilitate European trade. Stretching 17 kilometers, it exceeds the Mont Blanc tunnel. And when it opened, it was the longest tunnel in the world. With 6 million vehicles per year, including 900,000 heavyweight vehicles, traffic is extremely heavy in both directions. And if a collision occurs inside such a long tunnel, the consequences can be terrible. And that's what happened on October 24, 2001. At 9:45 a.m., 2 trucks collide about 1.5 kilometers from the south exit.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got
the temperature suddenly soars to hundreds of degrees Celsius. Visibility is reduced to 0, and the air becomes unbreathable. But the Gotthard tunnel is better designed than the older Mont Blanc tunnel and equipped with an evacuation gallery. It is accessed by emergency exits placed every 250 meters and runs along the road for its entire length. Ventilation systems also help remove smoke. The next day, when the temperature inside the tunnel had dropped, the emergency services discovered more than 40 charred vehicles, and among them the carcasses of the 2 heavyweight vehicles responsible for the accident. Despite the tunnel's safety features, 11 people are found dead. It could have been much worse if the structure had not been equipped with an emergency gallery and an efficient ventilation system. But But in Switzerland, the tragedy will revive the debate on the density of road traffic within the Gotthard tunnel. To relieve congestion, a 57-kilometer rail tunnel was inaugurated in 2020. Called the Gotthard Base Tunnel, it has become the longest tunnel in the world, and its construction cost more than 20 billion euros. Even more, construction of a second tunnel next to the first has already started. By 2032, each direction of traffic will have its own tunnel to reduce the risk of collision and ensure that the disaster of October 24, 2001 can never happen again. Asia has seen the construction of monumental bridges. China, Taiwan, Malaysia, Thailand. Structures several kilometers long have been built in many countries. One of them, the bridge Khun Ta, made headlines following a terrible tragedy that occurred during its construction. The disaster takes 5th place in the ranking. It happens in September 2007 in Vietnam, in the city of Khun Ta, in the south of the country. With a population of 1.2 million, Khun Ta is the largest city in the Mekong Delta. Its legendary river is the 4th longest in Asia. In 2004, construction began of a 4-lane cable-stayed road bridge designed to cross one of the arms of the Mekong and connect the province of Vinh Long to the city of Khun Ta. The objective, to replace a slow and overcrowded ferry service. The ambitious project was slated to last 4 years and cost over $300 million. But 3 years in, on September 26, 2007, at 8 a.m., a portion of the 87-meter-long access ramp, 30 meters high, collapses while 250 workers are constructing it.
Mounds of twisted steel and cables mark a spot over a river in Vietnam where a bridge under construction has collapsed.
The tragedy is unbearable. For 4 days, rescuers struggled to reach survivors trapped under tons of tangled concrete and steel.
The 4-lane bridge was supposed to be finished in 2008. It would have been the largest suspension bridge in Vietnam.
The magnitude of the collapse made the rescue difficult. In the end, 54 are dead and more than 100 are injured.
Adding, quote, "We still don't know the cause."
The ramp portion was supported by 3 pillars, numbers 13, 14, and 15. One hypothesis for the cause of the accident is that the heavy rains had softened the ground at the construction site and the concrete of the piers were stripped too soon. When the concrete for the deck was poured, it multiplied the load by 3. According to witnesses, pillar number 14 began to tilt, tearing a part of the deck located above pillar number 13. That pillar then tilted and caused the entire formwork to fall. In a domino effect, the entire portion under construction collapsed. Some experts claimed that the builders had been cautioned 8 months before the accident that the pillars could only support 15% of the expected load. But the work continued despite the warning, and no specific measures were taken. This overt negligence led to one of Vietnam's greatest civil engineering disasters to date. Among the types of bridges that have enabled humans to cross rivers, perhaps the most unusual is the floating bridge. Quick to install, floating bridges are often used by military forces when a watercourse blocks advancing troops and vehicles. A bridge that floats seems like a safe bet, but not always. This catastrophe takes the 4th place in our ranking. It happened in the Portuguese city of Porto. The city is famous throughout the world for the 6 bridges that connect the banks of the Douro River between Porto and the Via Nova de Gaia. These bridges include the Arabida Bridge, closest to the mouth of the river, and the Dom Luis Bridge, a symbol of the city and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But before these bridges, more than 200 years ago, another bridge crossed the Douro and ended in disaster. Back then, Portugal erected a floating bridge called Ponte das Barcas, or the Bridge of the Boats, to help the citizens of Porto and their goods circulate between the banks of the river. Designed by the Portuguese engineer and architect Carlos Amarante, the structure consisted of 20 boats connected by steel cables. It could be opened in 2 parts to allow river traffic. It was inaugurated in August 15, 1806. But 3 years later, Napoleon's forces attacked Portugal, triggering the First Battle of Porto. As the soldiers enter the city and begin to evacuate the citizens, shooting those who refuse to obey, the inhabitants have only one option: to flee across the river. Thousands of men, women, and children rush to the Ponte das Barcas. The sheer number of people racing uncontrollably across the bridge creates a situation that the engineers could never have imagined when they designed the structure. The bridge simply isn't up to the task. It shakes apart and sinks into the Douro, taking many lives with it. It is estimated that between 4,000 and 6,000 people lost their lives that day, drowned in the raging waters of the Douro while trying to escape the French troops. And it was all for nothing. Barely 1 month later, the city was retaken from Napoleon's hands by Portuguese and British forces. The fall of the Ponte das Barcas isn't just a sad day in Portuguese history, it's also the deadliest bridge accident in the world. The snow-capped peaks, skiers can use cable cars, chairlifts, or a less widespread but very efficient system called a funicular. 2 cars, placed on rails, are connected to each other by cables. The cars function like counterweights. The descending car is held by the weight of the ascending one, while the ascending car is partly pulled upwards thanks to the energy generated by the descending car. This reliable system enables you to climb the steepest slopes in complete safety, most of the time. A funicular was the site of one of the deadliest recent disasters. This one takes 3rd place in our ranking. It happened in Austria in 2000, in the small town of Kaprun, located south of Salzburg. Kaprun is a renowned Austrian resort where tourists come to enjoy a spectacular ski area open 11 months of the year. The Kitzsteinhorn Glacier, rising more than 3,200 meters above sea level. To access the slopes, a funicular was inaugurated in 1974, one of the most modern of its time. The 2 trains could scale a 30-degree slope at 25 kilometers per hour. taking 9 minutes to cross the 3,900-meter route, including 3,200 meters inside a tunnel. In the morning of November 11, 2000, 161 passengers board the funicular. In the front cabin, the driver operates the doors. As the train heads uphill, the rear cabin is empty, but an auxiliary electric heater keeps working. And that's where the trouble begins. The device is defective and catches fire. The flames quickly melt the plastic tubing that circulates the funicular's flammable hydraulic fluid. The resulting drop in pressure stops the funicular in its tracks, 600 meters inside the tunnel. The fire then begins spreading through the train, trapping the 161 passengers. At the front, the driver manages to open the doors. To escape the flames, passengers naturally flee towards the summit, a wrong and deadly choice. The tunnel acts like a gigantic chimney, sucking in oxygen from below to feed the fire and pushing toxic fumes upward. Every passenger who runs forward dies of asphyxiation, along with everyone 2.5 kilometers further up in the arrival station. Ironically, only those who ran downhill toward the fire come out alive. The next day, while the firefighters manage to get the fire under control, the rescuers can finally enter the tunnel. They discover a scene of devastation. The death toll is 155. It will take several weeks to identify the bodies of the victims charred by the flames. Only 11 passengers survive. A trial is held, but the Austrian courts release the 16 people accused of negligence. Despite protests from the victims' families, no personal fault could be proven. Since then, the tunnel has been sealed and the funicular rails were destroyed. 4 years after the tragedy of November 11, 2000, a memorial was installed near the site of the disaster in memory of the 155 people who lost their lives. Pedestrian bridges are elegant, popular, and very useful for crossing waterways, railways, or highways, and sometimes for linking buildings. The disaster that takes second place in our ranking happened on a footbridge in Kansas City, Missouri in the U.S. in 1981. At the time, the Hyatt Regency was one of the most luxurious hotels in the city. Opened in July 1980, the building was distinguished by the large volume of its lobby, featuring 3 catwalks suspended from the ceiling by steel rods. They connected the north and south wings to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors. Each measured about 37 meters long and weighed nearly 29 tons. The 4th floor walkway was located parallel to the 2nd floor walkway. In July 17, 1981, in the early evening, the dance hall was full as 1,600 people had come to attend a dance festival. 20 people are on the catwalk on the 4th floor, 40 on the 2nd floor walkway. All are watching the event below when suddenly the catwalk on the 4th floor collapses. Smashing onto the one on the 2nd floor. Together, the 2 failed footbridges come crashing down into the crowded hall.
c'était un film d'horreur au ralenti, raconte un témoin. Au bar, je regardais les danseurs du concours au milieu du hall de l'hôtel quand j'ai entendu un craquement sourd. Le temps de lever la tête, une passerelle surchargée de monde s'est effondrée au-dessus de nous et dans sa chute, elle en a entraîné une autre. On était 1500 spectateurs en bas et les morts auraient pu être beaucoup plus nombreux.
It will take 14 hours for the rescuers to extricate the survivors from the heaps of concrete, glass, and steel. At final count, 114 are killed, and 216 suffer serious injuries. The investigation showed that the designers had suspended the second-floor walkway by tie rods, 32 millimeters in diameter, from the fourth-floor walkway rather than from the ceiling. That meant the fourth-floor walkway bore the burden of its own weight, the weight of the second-floor walkway, and the weight of all the people crossing the bridge. The structure rested on 3 beams attached by the tie rods, fixed by nuts. The heavy load caused the nuts to sever the weld points. Disaster was inevitable and avoidable. It was said during the trial that even a freshman engineering student could have anticipated the disaster. The victims and their families receive hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation. The gross negligence in the design of the Hyatt Regency Hotel's walkways triggered wide-ranging reforms to safety standards in the United States. The hotel was rebuilt, and the new lobby walkway rests on concrete pillars. The building is considered one of the safest in the country. But the tragedy of July 1981 marked Kansas City and remains today the deadliest accident linked to the structural failure of a building in the history of the United States.
Les pompiers n'ont pas pu approcher le camion en flammes à l'origine de la catastrophe.
Drama in France in the Mont Blanc tunnel in 1999.
Pompiers pour parvenir à éteindre l'incendie.
In Kaprun, Austria in 2000. Or in Switzerland in the Gotthard tunnel in 2001. As we have seen, fires in closed spaces such as tunnels are devastating. One of them takes first place in our ranking. It happened in 1995 in Azerbaijan, in the country's capital, Baku. Azerbaijan is a former Soviet republic that became independent in 1991. Rich in hydrocarbons, the country is booming, and ultra-modern buildings spring up like mushrooms. Today, the Baku Metro has more than 30 kilometers of line and is used by more than 200 million passengers per year. But in the 90s, a terrible disaster struck an old Soviet-era metro train. On October 28, 1995, around 6 p.m., in the middle of rush hour, 5 crowded cars left Uldu Station toward Nariman-Narimanov Station, located nearly 2 kilometers away. After moving just 200 meters, the subway stops and a black blanket of toxic smoke invades the cars. The electrical system that controls the doors fails to respond. Nearly 1,000 travelers are trapped. Inside, 80% of the materials are flammable, most of them synthetic. Many passengers die within minutes, poisoned by carbon monoxide. The others manage to smash the windows and flee down the tunnel, but many will be trapped amid the chaos. For a long time, the press and the locals spread the rumor that a bomb caused the damage, but it's never proven. The investigation concludes that the fire was started by a simple short circuit in an electrical device located at the back of car 4. The tragedy left 289 dead and more than 500 injured. It is the deadliest metro accident in history.
this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up. No,
3 days later, the weight and the pain are agonizing.
Our bridges, our tunnels, our dams, they show to what extent we're capable of meeting the most ambitious construction challenges. But the disasters in our ranking prove that a lack of attention or a seemingly trivial failure can have tragic consequences. Today, new construction employs modern surveillance technology and is designed to meet increasingly stringent safety standards. But the thousands of existing structures throughout the world demand constant monitoring and meticulous maintenance to keep them safe. Still, no matter how hard we try or how vigilant we are, accidents will happen and materials will fail. When a disaster happens, it becomes news around the globe. Whether it's the scale or the spectacle.
Look at the debris. Look at all the debris. Look at all the debris in the air.
The financial cost or the lives lost. These massive events fill mankind with fascination and fear. In this series, we're looking at some of the biggest disasters to ever strike the planet.
أنا ما بعرف شو اللي صار، أنا كنت عم بتصيد، سمعت في حريقة ولعة، دورت بدي فل على بيتي وسمعت شي فقع.
Over the next hour, we'll see leaks, spills, and explosions that have ruined property, devastated the environment, and destroyed lives. As the human race has advanced, so has our ability to create and destroy. And the more advanced we become, the greater the possibility for calamity. We're looking at the world's worst man-made disasters. Since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, humanity has continued to develop and advance technology. Over the past 250 years, the most revolutionary inventions have propelled us forward by leaps and bounds, and for people around the world, improved living conditions. But these giant leaps have also been shadowed by major new risks, sometimes unanticipated, which we've had to learn to deal with, and which have often brought terrible consequences. To select the 10 most significant man-made disasters in history, we've looked at the costs, though the price we pay may be financial, environmental, or measured in human lives. We've studied accidents in factories, mines, oil platforms, and other places. Over several decades, we commence our countdown with this event that takes the number 10 spot on our ranking. Ever since mankind began messing around with chemicals more than 1,000 years ago, there have been deadly accidental explosions. When the blast occurs near a big city, the death count and chaos can be especially tragic. That's the disaster that befell the city of Beirut in 2020, which ranks number 10 on our list. Most chemical explosions are about the same. Chemical compounds react with one another and create rapidly expanding gases. Add heat and combustible materials, and you can generate a huge explosion. The more material you have and the faster the expansion, the more powerful and potentially deadly that blast will be. On August 4th, 2020, the port of Beirut experienced a devastating ammonium nitrate explosion. Commercially, ammonium nitrate is used to make fertilizers. It is also widely used as an ingredient in pipe bombs. It is cheap, relatively stable, and easy to come by. In 2013, the Lebanese court seized the cargo of a ship that made an unscheduled stopover in the port of Beirut. The ship was transporting 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate from Georgia to Mozambique. Authorities unloaded the cargo in one of the portside warehouses and then forgot about it. It sat for almost 6 years, and that's a problem. If ammonium nitrate is not stored properly, moisture can seep into it, and over time, it becomes less and less stable. Add just the slightest source of heat, and it can easily explode.
What happened? Oh my God.
In an instant, that warehouse becomes a 2,500-ton powder keg that explodes with incredible ferocity. It shoots a fireball hundreds of meters into the sky and sends powerful shockwaves in every direction, faster than the speed of sound. The blast shatters windows more than 3 kilometers away. The sonic boom is heard in Cyprus, some 241 kilometers away. But it is only Lebanon that feels the consequences. Beirut is a busy, highly populated city, and thousands of buildings are either demolished or badly damaged by the blast. All told, half the city lays in ruin. Needless to say, the site of the port area is completely flattened. 2,750 tons of aging, unstable ammonium nitrate can do that. But the loss of the buildings in and around the explosion is nothing compared to the human cost. The toll of the accident is terrible. 220 people dead, 7,000 injured, and 300,000 are left homeless. Residents who lived near the blast were killed instantly. Here 1 minute, gone the next. The carnage caused by the explosion made it impossible to identify their bodies. In a flash, Beirut descended into chaos, forever changing the lives of thousands of Lebanese.
أنا ما بعرف شو اللي صار، أنا كنت عم بتصيد، سمعت في حريقة والعة، دورت بدي فل على بيتي وسمعت شي فقع.
The physical damage will be estimated at more than $15 billion. This devastating and deadly accident could have been avoided if the Lebanese authorities had considered the volatile nature of the product tucked away in the nondescript warehouse at the busy port. Their criminal negligence incites the anger of the Lebanese. 6 days after the accident, under pressure from the street and after 4 ministers quit their posts, the Lebanese government is forced to resign. Recovery will be slow. Reverberations from the blast of August 4th, 2020 will last for decades. Industrious humans have always scoured and explored the earth in search of new resources. Excavation is a high-risk, high-reward activity that can sometimes yield unpredictable consequences. After Lebanon, we head to Indonesia to examine the disaster that's number 9 in our ranking, the explosion of the Sidoarjo mud volcano on the island of Java in 2006. Mud volcanoes are natural phenomena triggered when hot, highly pressurized water trapped in underground rocks finds an escape route, often as steam. Mixed with dirt and rocks, the water turns into a slurry of mud, pressurized mud, which can be propelled several hundred meters into the air. When it lands, it can create devastating mud flows. Mud volcanoes are often formed near lava volcanoes because the intense heat and increased seismic activity in the vicinity can fracture rocks where water has been trapped for millions of years. The island of Java is located in the middle of an active seismic zone, so a mud volcano isn't too surprising. However, there's nothing natural about this particular eruption of the mud volcano in the province of Sidoarjo. This one was man-made. It's May 2006. The Indonesian oil company PT Lapindo Brantas is exploring the area in search of a natural gas deposit. At this point, the borehole reaches a depth of 3,000 meters. It's then that the engineers decide to dispense with a steel formwork which makes it possible to avoid leaks from underground pockets. When they are no more than 200 meters from the deposit, they noticed small upwellings of water and rocky material coming from the borehole. But they have a job to do and decide to continue drilling. At that time, and according to their instruments, nothing suggests that they're on the verge of a catastrophe, but they are. On May 29th, the well suddenly begins to spew huge jets of gas, steam, and water several hundred meters into the air. The hot, toxic discharge from the earth is extremely dangerous. The engineers scramble to try to seal the well by pouring tons of concrete and mud into the borehole, but nothing helps. The eruption continues and the pressurized mud just keeps on coming. Hour after hour, day after day, it is unstoppable. The volcano expels up to 180,000 cubic meters of mud per day, or more than 250,000 tons of material, enough to fill an Olympic swimming pool every 20 minutes. Remarkably, the flow keeps that pace for 4 long years. Then, in 2010, the flow decreased by half, but the mud continued to gush out at a rate of 100,000 cubic meters per day. That's enough to bury New York Central Park with a meter-thick layer of mud in a month. The final toll of the eruption was 12 dead and 60,000 people displaced. Levees were built to hold back the flow, but nearby villages still get flooded. And waterways are polluted with toxic materials. Scientists estimate that it will be the year 2036 before the volcano finally stops spewing its dangerous mud. One thing is certain, the region will bear the scars of this eruption forever.
Meanwhile, in the bays and coves of this once pristine wilderness, the black tide continues to come ashore.
Now, at number 8 in our ranking, we head to the waters of the Gulf of Alaska, where we're going to see how devastation can be caused by one man's negligence and another's inexperience. This is the notorious Exxon Valdez oil spill. It's March 23, 1989, shortly after 9 p.m. The Exxon Valdez, a supertanker 300 meters long and weighing 250,000 tons, leaves Alaska with more than 180 million liters of oil on board. It is headed for Long Beach, California. It will never arrive at its destination. Just after midnight, the ship has traveled only a few dozen kilometers south when the third mate runs it aground on Bly Reef. The collision guts the hull. Over the next 3 hours, nearly 22 million liters of oil spill into the pristine waters of an Alaskan wildlife preserve in Prince William Sound. One of the greatest ecological disasters in history has just begun. The captain is summoned to the bridge. According to regulations, he shouldn't have left his command post at that point in the journey, but he had gotten drunk and gone to bed early. When the crew wakes him and he returns to the controls, he tries to free the ship from the reef, but all he manages to do is make the holes in the hull even worse. Then he waits half an hour to report that the Exxon Valdez is in distress. The recording of his radio call will go down in history.
That's the voice of the allegedly drunk captain of the Exxon Valdez as he first alerted the Alaskan Coast Guard that oil was leaking into the waters of Prince William Sound.
More than 40 million liters of oil leaked from the tanks, smothering 2,000 kilometers of coastline with poisonous black sludge. It decimated the wildlife. An estimated 250,000 seabirds, 3,000 sea otters, 300 seals, 250 eagles, and 22 killer whales become victims of the oil spill. And that's just initially. The spreading oil and its toxic effects would linger in the delicate ecosystem for a very long time.
Both beaches, just digging a few inches under the rocks, turned up oil.
The cleanup cost the Exxon company more than $2 billion. The dirtiest coasts were treated by high-pressure systems to scrub away the traces of crude oil clinging to the rocks. But that may have caused even more harm. The chemicals used to disperse the oil are toxic to some sea creatures, and the pressure washing destroyed the microorganisms and plankton that form the foundation of the region's food chain. At trial, Exxon argued that the accident was caused by human error. The oil company was fined $5 billion in 1994. But for 15 years, they challenged the sum, all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. The amount was reduced to $2.5 billion in 2006, and then, after further appeal, reduced again to just over $500 million in 2007. That's the equivalent of a single day's income for the multinational corporation. The residents and wildlife of Bly Island, Alaska, still live with the consequences of March 24, 1989. Though it took more than 25 years, the sea otter population is back to pre-oil spill levels. But the impact on the salmon population has been dramatic. Some scientists believe the salmon will never recover. The catastrophe is a long way from over. More than 30 years after the disaster, the ecological consequences of the sinking of the Exxon Valdez are still clearly visible. Despite the cleanup, Exxon left 90,000 tons of oil on Alaska's beaches.
Still a tough and exhausting job, but it's no longer tough for want of imagination.
Coal mining is one of the most dangerous jobs on the planet. In the 20th century, the coal mining industry experienced exponential growth to meet the ever-increasing demand for energy. The event that takes number 7 in our ranking occurred in 1966, next to a coal mine. For the details, we head to Wales and the town of Aberfan. Every day, hundreds of tons of ore get pulled from the mines and transported to the surface on conveyors. But only 1/3 of what's taken is usable.
This is the surface plant of every mine. Slag is the waste product of the pit.
Once the coal is isolated from the ore, the remaining useless rock, called spoil, gets dumped alongside the mine site. As extraction operations progress, these mining residues pile up day after day to form gigantic heaps of debris. In 1966, the Aberfan mine had been in operation for over a century. It had accumulated 7 heaps, where about 6 million tons of residue were piled. Slag heap number 7 was the most recent. Even so, it already had more than 500,000 tons of spoil on it, piled about 30 meters high. The heap loomed just above the village of Aberfan, a position that had for some time caused concern among the residents, and for good reason.
Many people have talked of the action of moistened clay.
If the slag heaps are exposed to heavy rain, the residue that runs off can become a thick slurry, which can cause heaps to collapse. In October 1966, it had begun to rain in Aberfan, a lot. It's October 21st, 1966, and it has been raining for weeks. At 7:30 in the morning, a surveillance agent discovers that slag heap number 7 had slipped 3 meters during the night. He closes the heap for more spoil, but it is already too late. At 9:15 a.m., the slag heap collapses. 250,000 tons of residue is transformed into a mud tsunami 10 meters high, which races down the side of the hill at 80 kilometers per hour. 2 farms and their inhabitants are engulfed in seconds. Although the villagers are alerted by the roar of the landslide, there's nothing they can do to prevent the tragedy they see coming. The avalanche of mud crosses a canal and crashes into the village school, burying part of the street and the school under tons of debris several meters deep. And since October 21st was the last day of the term, the school was full. The frantic villagers of Aberfan spring into action. Miners, parents, neighbors all rush towards the school to help save the trapped children, some of them their own children. They clawed desperately through the mud, which has already begun to harden. They managed to pull the last survivor from the rubble shortly after 11 a.m. And after that, silence. Any hope of finding other survivors has disappeared. Those who keep tirelessly digging hold on to a grain of hope, but know they were now looking to retrieve bodies. It will take an entire week to extract the remains of all the victims. A total of 144 people were killed by the mudslide. Among them, 116 children, most under the age of 10. It's a parent's worst nightmare. Many are buried in mass graves alongside the friends they died with. The report of the Commission of Inquiry holds the National Coal Office negligent and directly responsible for the tragedy because they placed the spoil heap directly above the village. Queen Elizabeth II will visit the scene to pay tribute to the victims. It was perfectly clear that the collapse of slag heap number 7 was completely avoidable. Despite the findings of the investigation, none of the defendants were prosecuted, fired, or even demoted. The village of Aberfan is still marked today by the event and by the loss of their children. It's the greatest cost imaginable. A community shattered, lives wasted.
Where there's muck, there's brass, they say in Yorkshire. In fact, where there's muck, there's less brass.
We stay in the UK to explore event number 6 in our ranking. Sometimes, seemingly unrelated events can come together to cause disaster. It happened in London in December 1952.
3 pollutants, smoke, grit, and a corrosive gas, sulfur dioxide, are poured into the air wherever fuel is burned inefficiently.
In busy shopping streets. Like all big cities in the 1950s, London had a problem with air pollution, which the locals quaintly referred to as fog. Through a combination of the coal-burning power stations that dotted the city, residential coal fires, and car exhaust, it was not uncommon to see a relatively thick blanket of it hanging in the air just above the British capital. In fact, it was a Londoner who coined the term smog back in 1905. But on December 5th, 1952, a unique set of circumstances combined to produce a history-making fog, or smog, event. The start of winter has been unusually cold, with temperatures dropping below freezing, which creates perfect conditions for the famous London fog. It doesn't help that residents are burning more coal to stave off the cold, and that the cheap coal burning throughout the city produces plenty of toxic smoke. Add to that London's new diesel-powered bus system, which was replacing electric trams, and you have a recipe for respiratory disaster. While the smog isn't unusual, what's strange is that it doesn't clear. An anticyclone settles over the city. It traps the thick layer of warm pollution under the cold air without a single gust of wind to disperse it. As chimneys and exhaust pipes continue to spew their smoke, the smog grows thicker. 1,000 tons of particles, 140 tons of hydrochloric acid, 14 tons of fluorinated compounds, and 370 tons of sulfur dioxide get added to the toxic brew. The choking smog plunges into darkness. Visibility is reduced to 1 meter, and the population is beginning to feel the dramatic effects of the pollution on their health.
The aim of the experiment, to show how the lungs react after inhaling polluted air.
People start dropping like flies as the pollution clogs their airways. It's especially hazardous for anyone already suffering from asthma or other respiratory conditions. Cases of lung inflammation are increasing. Many Londoners go on with their lives as if nothing is happening. But overwhelmed hospital workers know something is horribly wrong. The final toll from these 4 days of smog is estimated at more than 100,000 people sickened, with 12,000 fatalities. That's one death every 30 seconds.
The type of traffic varies considerably from place to place. In the West End, as for example at Piccadilly Circus, there are roughly equal...
After the disaster, England passed new laws to prevent a catastrophe like this from ever happening again. Though things are much improved today, the Great London Smog is an in-your-face reminder of the volume of poisonous gases we spew into the atmosphere every day. It also reminds us about the importance of climate and weather's effect on our well-being. If not for the subtle, saving power of the wind and rain, every toxin we spill into the atmosphere will linger and haunt us.
This black choking dust swirled through the sky and completely covered 1/5 of the United States landmass.
From one airborne disaster to another, to explore the event which ranks number 5 on our list, we head to the Great American West and the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. The Great Plains of America spreads out over a high plateau that crosses 10 states and stretches from Texas to the Canadian border. The Great Depression of the 1930s made all of the nation's hopes rest on the northwest of the country. From the end of the Civil War in 1865 through the 1920s, the U.S. government encouraged citizens to settle in the country's sparsely populated regions. The idea was to farm the land to feed the country, whose population was increasing.
The fertile plains and almost endless sunlight of summer produced abundant and healthy crops.
Hundreds of thousands of optimistic pioneers head west to cultivate millions of hectares of land that had, until then, remained wild. Their tractors rip up the long native grasses so the settlers could plant more and more crops. What nobody realizes is that the native grasses are holding the soil together and maintaining moisture in the ground. Now that the grasses are gone, the land is at the mercy of the weather.
The back of the drought was broken. Blessed rain fell on the parched earth of the disaster-ridden land. What nature had...
Heavy rains sometimes inundate the Great Plains, flooding it. But on average, the land gets less than 30 centimeters of rain, not nearly enough to sustain most crops. Mostly, the plains suffer drought. When a severe drought strikes in the early 30s, the crops fail. And with no grass to keep the moisture in the ground, the soil turns to dust. As an elevated plateau, the Great Plains are frequently buffeted by high winds that strip the land bare. The fertile farmland the settlers were counting on instead gets swallowed by massive clouds of heavy dust that blows across entire states. It buries farms, houses, and dreams.
The worst dust storms in our history turned day into night across enormous areas from the Midwest to the Rockies.
The storms are gigantic.
Today, scrap iron in a new American desert, the U.S. Dust Bowl.
In May 1934, a storm carries 5,500 tons of plains dust to Chicago before heading all the way to New York. That winter, red snow falls in New England. A year later, the sun gets blotted out by the so-called Black Sunday storm. It sends 3 million tons of topsoil airborne, reducing visibility to zero and covering everything in its path.
Blinding blizzard. Day turned into night as automobiles were often forced to use their headlights.
It's impossible to escape the Dust Bowl's storms.
And watched his precious land blow to the four winds.
The impact on farms in the Great American West is instant and devastating. Bankrupt farmers are forced to abandon their land because a farm with no topsoil is no longer a farm. In 1936, daily losses are estimated at the equivalent of $500 million. These storms would persist until the rains return in 1939. But the damage done to the environment was too great. Plains that had existed for millennia with native grasses now had no topsoil for anything to grow on. Over 100 million acres, an area larger than Germany, were now effectively barren. Grain production across America was cut in half. This was all during the Great Depression that crippled the economy, so many of the 2.5 million who abandoned their ruined farms had little opportunity to start again. 500,000 will end up on the street. Officially, the Dust Bowl claimed 7,000 lives from lung conditions and related illnesses, but that ignores the extreme poverty, starvation, or illnesses linked to deplorable living conditions. 70,000 refugees from the Dust Bowl present a new problem to the government. Squatter camps spring up with living conditions that alarm the health authorities.
70,000 refugees from the Dust Bowl present a new problem to California. Squatter camps spring up and living conditions alarm the health authorities.
The true toll of these dramatic, soul-crushing years is undoubtedly much higher.
Makeshift conditions.
The repercussions of the ill-fated Great Plains Dust Bowl tragedy lasted for decades. It cost the U.S. economy an estimated $50 billion and triggered an unprecedented migration as people headed further west to try to begin new lives. It might take centuries to assess the long-term impact of this noble experiment gone horribly wrong. It was a human, environmental, and economic disaster on a level the U.S. has not had to deal with since, and it was all avoidable.
Let me be clear. BP is responsible for this leak. BP will be paying the bill.
We've seen that oil spills are truly devastating, but the Exxon Valdez was a drop in the ocean compared to our number 4 disaster, one of the greatest ecological disasters of all time, the 2010 Deepwater Horizon explosion in the Gulf of Mexico. Drilling for oil is fraught with danger. Oil and natural gas are often found together, and tapping into a pressurized reserve can yield explosive results. Literally. It's April 2010. An oil platform stands above a 1,500-meter deep well in the Gulf of Mexico. The operation involves piercing the seabed over a 6,000-meter area to reach an oil reservoir. As the drilling platform nears the end of its mission, the extraction platform is about to take over. At this key moment, the operators test the pressure inside the well to verify that there are no leaks. At first, everything checks out, when suddenly, the pressurized gas fractures the concrete seal. Then it ignites, and the platform explodes. 11 dead, 17 wounded, but that's just the beginning. Only 25 kilometers from the coast, the first oil slicks are already visible.
15 miles out, and the first streaks of surface crude oil appear.
36 hours after the explosion, the platform capsizes and sinks into the Gulf of Mexico. It carries with it everything that helped prevent the hydrocarbon escaping from the wellbore. The crude oil then flows directly into the ocean. According to BP, the leak rate reached 1,000 barrels per day, or 150 liters of hydrocarbons per minute, an ecological disaster like no other. It will later be revealed that BP had grossly underestimated the spill rate. Scientists calculate that the monstrous leak was spewing more than 8,500 liters per minute. That's 60,000 barrels, or 12.5 million liters, per day.
There you go, now you see that ring.
It will take 3 months to close the well. By that time, nearly 4 million barrels will have spilled into the Gulf of Mexico, more than 500 million liters, an unprecedented disaster.
And we see evidence that counters the impression the oil is contained. Black smudges mixed with algae fringing white sandy beaches.
The environmental impact on the fish, birds, and sea mammals caught by the oil spill is horrendous, and in some cases, irreversible. More than 1 million birds are killed, along with countless fish. Endangered sea turtles suffer losses by the tens of thousands, and the local populations of dolphins and whales are decimated by the disaster. Despite extensive cleaning operations, the cleanup will never be completed. With that much oil over that large an area, the task is impossible. Marine wildlife will suffer the consequences for decades.
Metal funnel with a hole in the top.
The investigation will show that BP had tried to cut corners on the quality of the materials used on the platform. Investigators determined that engineers used improper materials, which undoubtedly contributed to the gas leak that triggered the explosion. The cement used to seal the borehole was not suitable for the high pressures it was likely to experience at such a depth. Once again, human negligence has cost the environment dearly. BP would eventually pay $60 billion to plug the leak, clean up the waters and coasts, and compensate the victims. But the biodiversity of the Gulf of Mexico still bears the stain of this oil spill.
Killer of Bhopal Union Carbide. They are responsible for the continuing disaster in Bhopal, and they must pay for it.
The disaster that holds the number 3 spot on the ranking takes us to Bhopal in central India. In 1984, this city of 800,000 inhabitants suffered a chemical disaster that's still impacting people today. Union Carbide is an American chemical company. Since 1969, its plant in Bhopal produced a popular agriculture pesticide called Sevin. While the rest of the industry changed production methods to use less dangerous ingredients, Union Carbide continued using the highly toxic chemical methoisocyanate, or MIC, 10 times more deadly than cyanide. It's especially dangerous if stored improperly.
Samples from the underground tanks are taken at regular intervals and tested for contamination.
The plant in Bhopal, however, with a long list of human errors and negligence, coupled with poor maintenance, spelled inevitable disaster.
Tons of the lethal gas were left in the storage tanks after the leakage.
October 1984. A faulty storage tank containing 42 tons of MIC is taken out of service. As part of the process, engineers extinguish the torch that is supposed to burn off any gas that might leak. The flame will never be rekindled. The stage is set for disaster. Inside the factory, many of the pipes and valves have fallen into disrepair. None of the safety systems are functioning properly. On December 2nd, water infiltrates the tank that was taken offline. MIC stored in the tank must be kept dry. The water triggers a chemical reaction that releases tremendous heat, and the cooling system is disabled. The rising heat increases the pressure inside the tank. On December 3rd, shortly after midnight, the tank ruptures. In 1 hour, it releases into the air 30 tons of one of the deadliest toxins on the planet. The factory has 2 alarms, one for the employees and one for the surrounding community. In another deadly act of negligence, neither alarm is working. While the employees flee the factory site, an hour and a half passes before the population is alerted. For thousands of people, it's already too late. That night, approximately 42 tons of MIC are released into the air. Traveling downwind, it enters Bhopal and the lungs of the residents as they sleep. When inhaled, MIC irritates the eyes, nose, and throat and causes muscle spasms. These symptoms are the first indication to the tens of thousands of poisoning victims that there was a problem at the factory. 3,000 people will die almost instantly. Hundreds of children will be affected by MIC fumes, poisoned within their own homes. 8,000 people lose their lives over the next 2 weeks. The final toll is more than 20,000 dead and many more than 500,000 sickened by the accident. 40 years later, many of them are still receiving treatment. Exposure to MIC can cause long-term health issues, which include vision, respiratory, and neurological problems, miscarriages, and even stunting growth of children. Because MIC is heavier than air, children are disproportionately affected. Their young lives changed forever. Union Carbide eventually settles out of court, agreeing to pay more than $700 million, or less than $12 per person injured. U.S. courts blocked any attempt to prosecute the company's American board of directors, but in 2010, more than 20 years after the disaster, Indian courts sentenced 8 Indian executives to 2 years in prison for causing negligent deaths. But that long-awaited minimal punishment is small consolation to the suffering poisoning victims. So far, we've seen explosions, collisions, and collapses, but not all man-made disasters arrive with a bang. In fact, disaster number 2 on our list occurred with barely a whisper, but it could be the deadliest of all. It's the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. This vortex is like a massive soup made up of a mixture of different-sized trash. Some chunks reach 50 meters long. But most are tiny pieces of discarded and degraded plastics and microplastics that pollute the ocean, kill marine life, and even find their way into our food chain and bloodstreams. During the Second World War, the production of plastic started to grow by leaps and bounds. Since then, plastic has become ubiquitous, without anyone suspecting it may cause problems. What doesn't go into a landfill eventually makes its way into the ocean. Over the decades, the prevalent ocean currents have gathered all this plastic into 2 gigantic, rotating masses called gyres. They're in constant motion from west to east and east to west between Japan and the United States. We don't know how much plastic they contain, but conservative estimates put the figure at 180 million tons, and it's growing by an additional 10 million tons each year. About 250,000 tons are on the surface. The rest has sunk into the depths. In total, there are more than 5 trillion pieces of plastic. The patch had long been theorized, but it wasn't discovered until 1997 by Charles Moore, a yachtsman racing to Hawaii. He said that for a full week, everywhere he looked, he saw garbage. The discovery shocked the world. The patch poses enormous problems. Lost nets from fishing boats that end up there still catch marine life, not just fish. Whales, seals, and turtles slowly die of suffocation. Seabirds can confuse plastic pellets and bottle tops for food and either eat them or feed them to their chicks. These undigestible bits of trash can rupture their insides. A plastic bag looks like a jellyfish to a hungry turtle who can swallow it and suffocate. The flotsam creates an even larger problem. It blocks sunlight. That means algae and plankton, the vital first link of the ocean's food chain, can't grow. Animals that depend on them can starve, or even mistake tiny particles of plastic for them. Either way, it impacts the entire food chain, slowly killing the ocean. Today, similar vortices are forming in all the seas of the world. And every year they grow bigger and are impossible to clean. It is the only disaster in our ranking that impacts the entire planet and all its inhabitants. It could even directly threaten the survival of humanity, because without a waste-free ocean, no one knows if the planet would ultimately remain habitable. We'll probably need to wait several centuries to measure the real consequences of this vortex of plastic waste clogging the heart of the Pacific Ocean. We'll now reveal the #1 disaster in our ranking. It put all of Europe in jeopardy and had the potential to kill millions. It's the 1986 meltdown of the nuclear reactor in Chernobyl, Ukraine. Nuclear power is more common than you may think. Across the planet, 440 power stations generate 10% of the world's electricity. Nuclear energy is up to 8,000 times more efficient than fossil fuels, emits no greenhouse gases, and is generally safe. But that's not to say it's without risks. When things go wrong, they can go very wrong. In March 2011, the disaster at Japan's Fukushima power plant proved how this type of accident represents one of the most existential threats of our time. Classified at level 7, the highest on the international scale of nuclear events, it was triggered by an earthquake and a tsunami of extremely rare intensity. Sparked by nature, it's not part of our countdown, unlike the disaster at Chernobyl, also classified level 7, and which represents one of the most dramatic examples of human error in the history of the industrialized world. It's April 25, 1986. Chernobyl engineers are launching a safety test on reactor number 4 to make sure the critical cooling systems could operate under a power failure. To run the test, they must turn off the emergency cooling system, which they did 10 hours before they began. During this time, the reactor continues to operate. Submerged uranium rods are bombarded with neutrons in a process called nuclear fission. This heats the water, which produces steam that powers a turbine, which generates electricity. The uranium rods, when they get overheated, can begin to melt and produce explosive gases. To regulate the heat reaction, control rods made of carbon are lowered into the reactor core. They are supposed to absorb neutrons and avoid a chain reaction that would lead to the reactor going into a runaway mode. Shortly after 1 a.m. on April 27th, the operators received permission to launch the test. Safety systems are disabled to prevent them from interfering with the process. Almost immediately, there's a massive power surge. The core destabilizes and a meltdown looks likely. They try to insert the control rods, but they jam on the way in. The reactor reaches the point of no return. There is no way to stop the nuclear chain reaction. At 1:23 a.m., the reactor explodes. The blast is so powerful, it throws its 1,000-ton concrete reactor cover into the roof of the power station, destroying it. The open reactor burns at 4,000 degrees Celsius. The fire will rage for several days. Millions of liters of water are sprayed, trying to cool the reactor. Then thousands of tons of sand, clay, and lead will be deployed to prevent radiation from escaping into the atmosphere. At the time, 115,000 people lived in the area. 36 hours pass before they're ordered to evacuate with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They will never be allowed to return. The entire exclusion zone, which still exists today, spans 4,800 square kilometers, more than twice the area of London. It will take 10 days to extinguish the fire. The reactor will, by then, have released 400 times more radiation than the Hiroshima bomb. It would take another 6 months before the reactor is entombed in a sarcophagus of concrete and steel. It must remain there for at least 20,000 years. On the site of the accident, 600,000 men, known as liquidators, were hired to clean up the plant and the surrounding area. The people who were working in Chernobyl could only remain for 90 seconds before receiving more than a lifetime dose of radiation. The radioactive cloud spreads over northern Europe as far as Scotland, 2,400 kilometers away. The consequences will be felt throughout Europe. Cancer and birth defects increase in the 10 years following the accident. Thankfully, winds kept the worst of the cloud away from major population centers. The official death toll from the disaster was just 31. These victims died in the explosion or in the immediate aftermath from acute radiation poisoning. But the actual figure is almost certainly higher. The death rate among the liquidators is almost double that of the general population. And those who lived under the radiation cloud are far more likely to suffer from cancer years later. Russian estimates suggest 30,000 have died. In 2006, a scientific report by Greenpeace estimated the figure at 200,000 deaths between Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. But the length of time between exposure and disease makes it difficult to draw clear links to the Chernobyl accident. We do know, however, that the radioactive half-life is several thousand years, and the Chernobyl disaster will continue to haunt us for centuries to come. These 10 disasters are a small catalog of man-made tragedies impacting us and our planet. The only thing they share is that they all could have been avoided. Neglect, greed, and incompetence have always led mankind astray. Regulations and safety standards may change, but human nature never will. In this countdown, we've shown how the actions of an individual, company, or group can exert an impact that reverberates around the world, with consequences that can last for hundreds or even thousands of years. All we can do is hope that we're safe from the next inevitable disaster.